There are some cases that a surgeon never forgets. Not because of the complexity, not because of the technique required, but because they change something deep inside you. Something that makes you question everything you thought you knew about medicine, about life, about the invisible threads that connect us all. I'm Dr. James Bennett. I've been practicing surgery for 17 years here in Washington, D.C. I've worked at Georgetown University Hospital, seen thousands of patients walk through those doors. Some leave with their stories complete. Others teach you that medicine is far more than what we learned in medical school. It was 3:15 in the morning when my pager went off. The emergency room was calling. Priority 1. Those 2 words that make every surgeon's heart skip a beat. Because you know someone's world is about to change forever. I remember walking through those hospital corridors, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows on the walls, the smell of antiseptic mixed with that particular silence that only hospitals have at that hour. You know the one. When the world outside sleeps, but inside these walls, life and hope battle against time. The attending physician met me halfway. Dr. Catherine Adams, someone I'd worked with countless times. But that night, something in her eyes was different. There was urgency, yes, but also something else. Something that made me slow my steps. "James," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have a 32-year-old male, Thomas Mitchell. He came in an hour ago with his wife, Sarah, and their 3-year-old daughter, Emma." She paused, and in that pause I could feel the weight of what was coming. "The scans show something we've rarely seen. It's complex, James, very complex. And he knows it." I followed her down the corridor, my mind already shifting into that familiar mode, the surgeon's mindset where emotion steps aside and clinical thinking takes over. But what I didn't know was that this case would challenge everything I thought I understood about that separation. We stopped outside room 302. Through the glass window, I saw him for the first time. Thomas Mitchell was lying on the hospital bed, his wife Sarah beside him, holding his hand with both of hers. Their little girl, Emma, was curled up in the chair next to the bed, sleeping despite the bright hospital lights. Even through the glass, I could see the tension in Sarah's shoulders, the way she leaned into her husband as if trying to transfer her strength to him. But it was Thomas's eyes that stopped me cold. I've seen fear in patients' eyes before. I've seen resignation, anger, confusion. But Thomas Mitchell's eyes held something different. They held a desperate, fierce determination. The look of a man who had something to live for that was bigger than his own fear. Before I continue, tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. Stories like this one reach farther than you imagine. Dr. Adams handed me his chart, but I barely glanced at it. I was still watching through that window, studying the 3 of them. A family, a unit, a world that was about to be tested in ways they never imagined. His condition, Dr. Adams continued, "It's something that requires immediate intervention, but the risks." She trailed off, and I understood why. In 17 years of surgery, I'd learned to read between the lines. When experienced doctors struggle to find words, when they pause and look away, it means the odds are not in our favor. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was filled with that particular silence that comes when people are trying to be strong for each other. Sarah looked up at me, and I saw in her face the same thing I'd seen in her husband's eyes. Not just fear, but a fierce love that refused to give up. "Dr. Bennett?" Thomas's voice was steady, but I could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. "Yes," I said, moving closer to his bed. "I'm Dr. Bennett. I'm going to be taking care of you." Emma stirred in her chair, and Sarah gently stroked her hair, trying not to wake her. It was such a simple gesture, but it hit me with unexpected force. This wasn't just about saving a life. It was about keeping a family together. Thomas squeezed his wife's hand and looked directly at me. "Doctor, I need you to know something. I have a little girl who still believes her daddy can fix anything. A wife who..." His voice cracked slightly. "A wife who still waits for me to come home every night." He paused, gathering himself. "I know what the scans probably show. I know this isn't going to be easy, but I need to go back to them. Whatever it takes." Sarah's grip on his hand tightened, and I saw her close her eyes, as if trying to hold back everything she was feeling. I'd heard similar words from patients before. The desperate bargaining that comes when someone realizes their life is hanging in the balance. But something about the way Thomas said it, the quiet certainty in his voice, made it different. "We're going to do everything possible," I told him, which is what we always say. But as I looked at this young father, at his wife trying to be strong, at their daughter sleeping peacefully, unaware that her world might change forever, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't going to be just another surgery. "Dr. Bennett." Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice soft but steady. "How long have you been doing this?" 17 years, I replied. She nodded slowly. "Then you've seen families like ours before." It wasn't a question. It was a statement that carried the weight of understanding. She knew that in these halls, stories like theirs played out every day. Some ended with celebration, others with heartbreak. "Yes," I said simply. "Then you know," she continued, "what it means when someone has everything to live for." I did know. But what I didn't know was how deeply this particular case would mark me. How the next few hours would challenge not just my skills as a surgeon, but my understanding of what it means to hold someone's life, someone's entire world, in your hands. Thomas looked at me one more time. "Doctor, I trust you, but I need to ask you something." "What is it?" He glanced at his sleeping daughter, then back at me. "Just promise me you'll fight as hard as I am." In that moment, I understood that this wasn't just a patient making a request. This was a father, a husband, asking another human being to care about his life as much as he did. "I promise," I said, and I meant it. Little did I know that in the next few hours, that promise would be tested in ways I never imagined. That I would find myself facing not just the greatest technical challenge of my career, but a moment that would change how I see medicine, life, and the sacred responsibility we carry as healers. But that part of the story, the part that still makes my hands tremble when I think about it, was still ahead of us. As I left Thomas Mitchell's room, my mind was already racing through the surgical possibilities. But my heart was still back in that room with a father who had just asked me to fight as hard as he was fighting. Dr. Adams walked beside me toward the imaging room, our footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. It was 4 o'clock in the morning now, that strange hour when the hospital feels suspended between yesterday's emergencies and tomorrow's hope. "Show me the scans," I said, though part of me dreaded what I was about to see. The imaging room was dimly lit, the large monitors casting an eerie blue glow. Dr. Adams pulled up Thomas's CT scans, and immediately I understood why she had struggled to find words earlier. There, illuminated on the screen, was something that made my 17 years of experience feel suddenly inadequate. "It's wrapped around the major vessels," Dr. Adams said quietly, pointing to the complex mass visible in the images. "Look here, James. See how it's intertwined with the cardiac structures? And here." She moved her finger across the screen. "It's affecting the arterial pathways." I leaned closer, studying the intricate details. In all my years, I had seen complicated cases, but this was like looking at a puzzle where every piece was connected to something vital. "The location makes it almost impossible to approach safely," I murmured, more to myself than to her. "One wrong move and—" I didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew what one wrong move could mean. "That's not even the worst part," Dr. Adams continued, her voice heavy with concern. "Look at these readings from his latest blood work." She pulled up another screen, and the numbers told a story that made the situation even more precarious. Thomas's body was already showing signs of stress, fighting against something that was growing stronger by the hour. "How much time do we have?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Hours, James. Maybe less." The weight of those words settled over me like a heavy blanket. Hours. In just a few hours, a little girl might wake up without her father. A woman might become a widow. An entire family's future hung in the balance of what would happen in the next few critical hours. I walked back toward Thomas's room, but stopped outside the door. Through the glass, I could see that Emma had woken up and was now sitting on her father's bed, her small hand resting on his chest. Sarah was reading to her from a children's book, her voice soft and soothing despite the fear I knew she was carrying. It was such a simple, beautiful moment. A family being together. And yet I knew that in a few minutes I would have to walk in there and explain to them just how complicated their situation really was. Thomas looked up and saw me watching. He said something to Sarah, who looked toward the door. I took a deep breath and entered the room. "Daddy, are you going to be okay?" Emma asked, her innocent voice cutting through all the medical complexity with the pure simplicity of a child's love. Thomas smiled at his daughter, and for a moment, the fear disappeared from his eyes. "Daddy's going to be just fine, sweetheart. Dr. Bennett here is going to take good care of me." The trust in his voice, the way he spoke with such certainty to protect his daughter's innocence, hit me harder than any medical textbook ever could. "Emma," Sarah said gently, "why don't you go get some juice from the nice nurse? Mommy needs to talk to the doctor for a minute." Emma climbed down from the bed and walked toward the door, but turned back to me. "Dr. Bennett, you're going to make my daddy better, right?" I knelt down to her level, looking into eyes that held the absolute faith that only children possess. "I'm going to do everything I can, Emma. Everything." She smiled and skipped out of the room, leaving behind a silence that seemed to echo with the weight of promises and prayers. Sarah closed the door behind her daughter and turned to face me. "Tell us," she said simply. I pulled up a chair and sat down, choosing my words carefully. In moments like these, honesty and hope have to somehow coexist. "Thomas, what we're dealing with is complex," I began. "The mass we can see in your scans is positioned in a way that makes surgery extremely challenging. It's intertwined with some of the most critical structures in your chest." Thomas nodded, his grip tightening on Sarah's hand. "But it can be removed." "That's what we're going to attempt," I said. "But I need you both to understand. This surgery will require precision, unlike anything I've attempted before. We'll be working in spaces measured in millimeters, around structures that can't tolerate even the smallest error." Sarah's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "What are the odds, Dr. Bennett? This is always the hardest question. How do you quantify hope? How do you put percentages on love, on the will to live, on the inexplicable factors that sometimes make the impossible happen?" "The odds are challenging," I said honestly. "But they're not impossible. And Thomas has something that many patients don't have." "What's that?" Thomas asked. "He has everything to fight for," I said, looking between them. "And sometimes that makes all the difference." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, processing what I had told him. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but determined. "Dr. Bennett, I need to tell you something. Before Sarah and I got married, before Emma was born, I was in the military. I served 2 tours overseas." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've been in situations where the odds weren't good, where everything seemed stacked against us. But I learned something during those years. It's not about the odds. It's about the mission. And my mission now is to come home to my family." Sarah squeezed his hand, tears beginning to form in her eyes, but she held them back. "I'm ready for this surgery," Thomas continued. "I trust you, and I trust that whatever happens, you'll know we gave everything we had." It was 8:30 in the morning when we wheeled Thomas toward the operating room. The sun was beginning to stream through the hospital windows, painting everything in a golden light that seemed almost symbolic. Sarah walked beside us as far as she could, holding Thomas's hand. Emma had fallen asleep again in the family waiting area, curled up on a couch with her stuffed rabbit. At the doors to the surgical wing, we had to stop. This was as far as family could go. Thomas looked up at his wife. "Remember what I told you on our wedding day?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. "I promised I'd always come back to you," he whispered. "That promise still stands." They kissed. And in that kiss, I saw years of shared dreams, private jokes, quiet mornings, and the kind of love that doesn't come along very often. As we pushed through the doors, Thomas called out one more time, "Sarah, tell Emma that Daddy loves her to the moon and back." And then the doors closed, and it was just Thomas and me and the medical team that would spend the next several hours fighting for something more precious than any of us fully understood. "Dr. Bennett," Thomas said as we entered the pre-op area. "Just before we start, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you have children?" The question caught me off guard. "No," I said. I don't. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Then let me tell you what it's like. Every morning when Emma wakes up, she runs into our bedroom and jumps on the bed. And for just a moment, the whole world is perfect. That's what I'm fighting to get back to. Those perfect mornings." As the anesthesia team began their preparations, Thomas looked at me one last time. "Doctor, just bring me back to them." Those were the last words he spoke before the anesthesia took effect. But they would echo in my mind through every moment of what was about to become the most challenging surgery of my career. Because what Thomas Mitchell didn't know, what I hadn't told him, was that the complexity we were about to face would push every limit of medical science and test whether sometimes love and determination can overcome what textbooks say is impossible. The operating room at Georgetown University Hospital has always been my sanctuary. For 17 years, it's been the place where training, instinct, and determination come together to fight for life. But as I stood there at 9 o'clock in the morning, scrubbing in while Thomas Mitchell lay unconscious on the table, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Doubt. Not doubt in my abilities. I'd trained for cases like this. But doubt about whether human skill alone would be enough for what we were about to attempt. "Dr. Bennett, patient is stable and ready," called out Jennifer Hayes, our lead surgical nurse. Jennifer had been part of my team for 8 years. She knew my rhythms, anticipated my needs, and had never once questioned my decisions. But when I looked at her that morning, I saw something in her eyes that mirrored my own uncertainty. The surgical team was assembled. Dr. Adams would assist, along with Dr. Michael Thompson, our cardiovascular specialist, and Dr. Lisa Chen, our anesthesiologist. Each one of them was among the best in their field. If Thomas Mitchell had any chance, it was with this team. But as I approached the table and looked down at him, this young father who had trusted me with his life, I felt the full weight of what we were attempting. "Let's review the approach one more time," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of thoughts in my head. We had spent the last hour going over every detail, every possible scenario. The mass was positioned like a spider's web around Thomas's most vital structures. Each thread we would have to carefully untangle could either free him or end everything. "First incision will be here," I pointed to the marked area on his chest. "We'll need to be extremely careful as we approach the pericardium. The imaging shows the mass has finger-like projections that have wrapped around the major vessels." Dr. Thompson nodded. "Heart rate and blood pressure are stable. But James, once we start disturbing those tissues..." He didn't need to finish. We all knew that Thomas's vital signs could change in seconds once we began working in that delicate area. "Dr. Chen, I'm going to need you to monitor everything closely. The slightest change, the smallest irregularity. You let me know immediately." "Understood," she replied, her eyes focused on the array of monitors surrounding us. I took one final look at the surgical plan, then at Thomas's peaceful face. Somewhere in the family waiting area, Sarah was probably pacing, checking her phone, maybe holding Emma close. They were counting on us. They were counting on me. Scalpel. The first incision was clean, precise. Years of training guided my hand as we began to work our way deeper, layer by layer, toward the complexity that awaited us inside. For the first 30 minutes, everything proceeded according to plan. We moved carefully, methodically, exposing the structures we needed to access while avoiding any unnecessary trauma to the surrounding tissues. But then we saw it. "My God," Dr. Adams whispered. What the imaging had shown us was accurate, but seeing it in person was something entirely different. The mass wasn't just wrapped around the major vessels. It had integrated itself into the tissue in ways that seemed almost impossible. "It's like it grew specifically to make itself irremovable, Dr. Thompson observed, his voice tense. I studied the situation carefully, my mind racing through possibilities. This wasn't just surgery anymore. This was like performing microsurgery while defusing a bomb. Every cut, every movement had to be perfect. "We're going to take this 1 millimeter at a time," I said. "Jennifer, I'm going to need the microscopic instruments. We can't afford any broad movements here." As we switched to the more delicate instruments, I became aware of something else. The operating room had fallen into an unusual silence. Normally, there would be quiet conversation, the typical rhythm of a surgical team working together. But this felt different. Everyone understood we were attempting something at the very edge of what was medically possible. Heart rate increasing slightly, Dr. Chen reported. Still within acceptable range, but Thomas's body is responding to the manipulation. I paused for a moment, studying the monitors. Thomas was stable, but his body knew we were working in dangerous territory. "Talk to him, Dr. Chen," I said unexpectedly. "What?" "Talk to him. Even under anesthesia, patients can sometimes hear us. Tell him about his family. Tell him to keep fighting." Dr. Chen looked surprised, but she began speaking in a soft voice. "Thomas, your little girl Emma is waiting for you. Sarah is in the waiting room, and she believes in you. We all believe in you." Something about her words seemed to settle the monitors. Thomas's vital signs stabilized. We continued working, and I found myself falling into a rhythm I'd never experienced before. It was as if my hands were being guided by something beyond just medical training. Each cut seemed to reveal exactly what we needed to see. Each movement brought us closer to our goal without causing harm. "Dr. Bennett," Dr. Adams said quietly, "look at this." She was pointing to an area where we had just carefully separated some of the mass from a major vessel. The tissue looked healthier than we had expected, almost as if it was healing itself. "That's unusual," Dr. Thompson observed. "Normally, after this kind of integration, we'd expect to see more damage to the surrounding tissue." I continued working, but I was beginning to notice other things that didn't quite fit the textbook description of what we should be seeing. The mass was releasing more easily than predicted. The surrounding tissues were responding better than anticipated. 2 hours into the surgery, we had made progress that should have taken 4 hours. Not because we were rushing, we were still being incredibly careful, but because everything was going more smoothly than any of us had dared to hope. "Vital signs remain stable," Dr. Chen reported. "Better than stable, actually. His body is responding remarkably well to the procedure." But then, just as I was beginning to feel cautiously optimistic, everything changed. "Dr. Bennett," Dr. Chen's voice cut through the operating room like a blade. "We're losing him." The monitors that had been steady suddenly erupted in alarms. Thomas's blood pressure was dropping rapidly, his heart rate becoming erratic. "What happened?" I demanded, my hands still deep in the surgical site. "I don't know. Everything was stable, and then—" Dr. Chen was working frantically, adjusting medications, checking connections. "Could be bleeding we haven't detected," Dr. Adams suggested urgently. "No. Look at the surgical site. There's no significant bleeding," Dr. Thompson countered. I looked at the monitors, then back at Thomas. This wasn't following any pattern I recognized. It was as if his body had suddenly decided to give up, despite the fact that the surgery was going better than expected. "Dr. Chen, push another dose of epinephrine." "Already done." No response. The alarms were getting louder, more insistent. Thomas's heart was struggling, his blood pressure continuing to drop despite our interventions. And then, in that moment of crisis, I remembered his words from earlier. "Just bring me back to them." I looked at his face, peaceful despite the chaos of alarms surrounding us, and I made a decision that went against everything I'd been taught in medical school. "Everyone stop what you're doing," I said firmly. "Dr. Bennett, we need to—" Dr. Adams started. "Stop. Everyone just stop for a moment." The room fell silent except for the insistent beeping of the monitors. I leaned closer to Thomas and spoke directly to him, my voice cutting through all the medical noise. "Thomas, I know you can hear me. I know you're fighting. But I need you to remember something. Emma is waiting for those perfect mornings you told me about. Sarah is waiting for you to come home. You made her a promise on your wedding day, remember?" For several seconds, nothing happened. The monitors continued their alarming symphony. And then, "Heart rate stabilizing," Dr. Chen whispered, almost afraid to break the spell. "Blood pressure coming up," Dr. Thompson added, his voice filled with amazement. Within minutes, Thomas's vital signs had returned to normal. Better than normal. They were stronger than they had been all morning. "I've never seen anything like that," Dr. Adams said quietly. "It was like he heard you and decided to come back." I stared at the monitors, then at Thomas's peaceful face, and I realized that what we were witnessing wasn't just medical. It was something that transcended everything I thought I understood about healing. But the surgery was far from over. We still had the most complex part ahead of us, the final removal of the mass from around his heart itself. And what would happen in the next hour would challenge not just my skills as a surgeon, but everything I believed about the boundaries between science and the inexplicable power of human will. What happened next in that operating room will stay with me for the rest of my life. After Thomas's miraculous stabilization, we stood at the threshold of the most delicate part of the entire procedure. The mass around his heart, the part that would determine whether he would ever hold Emma again, whether he would keep that wedding day promise to Sarah. It was 11:30 in the morning. We had been working for over 2 hours, and my team was beginning to show signs of the intense concentration this surgery demanded. But there was something else in the room now, a sense that we were part of something larger than a medical procedure. "Approaching the cardiac tissue," I announced, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. Through the surgical microscope, I could see the intricate web of abnormal tissue that had wrapped itself around Thomas's heart, like a vine around a tree. The imaging hadn't lied. This was the most complex anatomical challenge I had ever encountered. "Heart rate holding steady," Dr. Chen reported. "Thomas is fighting with us." I began the painstaking process of separating the mass from the cardiac muscle itself. This required movements measured not in millimeters, but in fractions of millimeters. One wrong move could cause catastrophic bleeding. Another could damage the heart muscle permanently. "Suction," I requested, as we worked to maintain clear visibility in the surgical field. Dr. Adams positioned the suction device with practiced precision, while Dr. Thompson monitored the cardiac readings on his specialized equipment. "The tissue planes are separating better than expected," Dr. Thompson observed. "It's almost like the mass wants to be removed." He was right. In 17 years of surgery, I had never encountered tissue that separated so cleanly, so cooperatively. It was as if Thomas's body was actively participating in its own healing. But then we reached the deepest part of the procedure, the area where the mass had integrated most completely with the heart muscle itself. "This is it," I said quietly. "This is the part that will determine everything." I paused for a moment, studying the surgical field through the microscope. What I was seeing defied logic. The mass had grown into the heart muscle, yet there appeared to be a natural plane of separation, almost like the tissue had left itself a way out. "Beginning final dissection," I announced. As I made the first delicate cut in this critical area, something unexpected happened. The tissue began to separate on its own, as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Dr. Bennett," Dr. Adams whispered, "are you seeing this?" I was seeing it, but I couldn't quite believe it. The mass was practically lifting away from the heart muscle, revealing healthy pink tissue underneath. "Cardiac function is improving in real time," Dr. Thompson reported, his voice filled with amazement. "I've never seen anything like this. It's as if removing the mass is allowing his heart to remember how to work properly." We continued working, and what should have been the most treacherous part of the surgery became something else entirely. The mass continued to separate cleanly, revealing healthy tissue that looked better than we had any right to hope for. "Final attachment point," I announced as we approached the last connection between the abnormal tissue and Thomas's heart. This was the moment. Everything came down to this single, final cut. If I succeeded, Thomas would have every chance of a complete recovery. If I failed, I positioned the microscopic scalpel at the exact point where the last thread of abnormal tissue clung to his heart. Through the microscope, I could see the healthy heart muscle pulsing steadily, as if it was eager to be free. "Thomas," I said aloud, knowing he couldn't hear me but somehow feeling he could. "This is for Emma's perfect mornings." I made the cut. The final piece of the mass lifted away cleanly, completely, leaving behind a heart that looked better than it had any medical reason to look. "It's done," I said, hardly believing my own words. The operating room fell silent except for the steady, strong rhythm of Thomas's heart on the monitors. "Cardiac function is not just normal," Dr. Thompson announced, his voice filled with wonder. "It's better than normal. His heart is beating like it's 10 years younger." "All vital signs optimal," Dr. Chen added. "Thomas is not just stable. He's thriving. As we began the closing procedure, I found myself thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The late-night call, the desperate family in room 302, the surgical complexity that should have been impossible to overcome. But there was something else, something that couldn't be explained by medical textbooks or surgical technique. Throughout the entire procedure, it had felt like we weren't working alone, like there was some force, some will to live that was stronger than the medical obstacles we faced. Closing the chest cavity, I announced as we began the final phase of the surgery. Layer by layer, we carefully closed the surgical site, each suture bringing Thomas closer to his return to consciousness, to his family, to those perfect mornings with Emma. It was 1:15 in the afternoon when we completed the final closure. The surgery that we had expected to take 6 or 7 hours had been completed in just over 4. Not because we had rushed, every movement had been deliberate and careful, but because everything had gone more smoothly than anyone could have predicted. Post-operative vitals are excellent, Dr. Chen reported. Thomas is ready to be transferred to recovery. As we prepared to move him, I took one final look at the monitors. Every number, every reading indicated not just success, but success beyond anything we had hoped for. Dr. Bennett. Dr. Adams said as we walked alongside Thomas's gurney toward the recovery room. In all my years of surgery, I've never experienced anything like what we just witnessed. Dr. Thompson nodded in agreement. The way the tissue separated, the way his heart responded, the stability throughout the procedure, none of it follows normal surgical patterns. Dr. Chen, who had been monitoring Thomas's vital signs throughout the entire procedure, was equally amazed. It was like his body was working with us every step of the way, like he was determined to survive not just for himself, but for something larger. We settled Thomas into his recovery bed, and I stood there watching him breathe steadily, peacefully. His face looked relaxed, almost serene. The monitors showed strong, steady vital signs that indicated not just survival, but complete recovery. But the most important moment was still ahead of us. I walked down the corridor toward the family waiting area, my mind trying to process everything we had just experienced. How do you explain to a family that their loved one didn't just survive an impossible surgery? He thrived through it in ways that challenged everything we thought we knew about medicine. As I approached the waiting area, I could see Sarah pacing near the windows. Emma was awake now, sitting in a chair with her coloring book, but her eyes kept drifting toward the corridor where she knew news about her father would come from. When Sarah saw me walking toward them, she stood up immediately, her face searching mine for any indication of what I was about to tell her. "Sarah," I said as I reached them, and I couldn't help but smile. The moment she saw that smile, her knees almost gave out. She grabbed the back of a chair for support, her eyes filling with tears she had been holding back for hours. "He's okay," I said simply. "Thomas is going to be fine." Emma looked up from her coloring book. "Daddy's all better?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said, kneeling down to her level. "Daddy's all better." Sarah sank into a chair, the relief washing over her like a wave. "Can we see him?" "He's still waking up from the anesthesia, but yes. In just a few minutes you can see him." What I didn't tell them in that moment was that Thomas hadn't just survived. He had been part of something that none of us in that operating room fully understood. Something that had made the impossible possible, and had reminded us all why we became doctors in the first place. The recovery, the reunion, and the profound impact this case would have on everyone involved was still ahead of us. 20 minutes later, I walked Sarah and Emma down the corridor toward Thomas's recovery room. Sarah's hand was trembling as she held mine, and Emma was practically bouncing with excitement, clutching her stuffed rabbit and asking every few steps if we were almost there. "Remember, he might be a little groggy," I explained gently. "The anesthesia takes time to wear off completely, but he's awake, and he's been asking for you." As we approached room 314, I could hear Thomas's voice from inside, weak but unmistakably alive, talking quietly with one of the recovery nurses. Sarah stopped outside the door, suddenly overcome with emotion. "Dr. Bennett, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," I said softly. "Just go in there and give him those perfect mornings he fought so hard to get back to." Sarah pushed open the door, And what happened next is something that still brings tears to my eyes when Thomas was propped up in the hospital bed, pale but alert, his eyes clear and focused. The moment he saw Sarah, his face lit up with a smile that seemed to fill the entire room. "Hey, beautiful," he said, his voice hoarse but strong. Sarah rushed to his bedside, careful not to disturb any of the monitoring equipment, and took his hand in both of hers. "You kept your promise," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You came back to us." "I told you I would," Thomas replied, squeezing her hand. "I told you I'd always come back." But it was Emma's reaction that truly captured the magic of the moment. She had been hanging back near the door, suddenly shy in the presence of all the medical equipment. But when Thomas turned toward her and opened his arms, something beautiful happened. "Come here, princess," Thomas said softly. "Daddy missed you so much." Emma ran to the bed, and Thomas, despite having just undergone major surgery, lifted her up into his arms with a strength that surprised everyone in the room. "Daddy, you're really okay?" Emma asked, her small hands touching his face as if to make sure he was real. "I'm more than okay, sweetheart," Thomas said, holding her close. "I'm perfect because I'm here with you and Mommy." I stood in the doorway, watching this reunion, and I felt something I had never experienced before in all my years of medicine. It wasn't just professional satisfaction at a successful surgery. It was something deeper. It was the profound realization that what we had accomplished in that operating room transcended medical science. "Dr. Bennett," Thomas called to me, and I stepped closer to the bed. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Thomas looked at his wife and daughter, then back at me. "During the surgery, I could hear you. I could hear everyone talking. And there was a moment when I felt myself drifting away, like I was being pulled towards something peaceful and warm." Sarah's grip on his hand tightened, and Emma looked up at her father with wide eyes. "But then I heard you say something about Emma's perfect mornings," Thomas continued. "And suddenly I could see her so clearly, running into our bedroom, jumping on the bed, laughing. And I knew I couldn't leave that behind. I couldn't leave them." Dr. Adams, who had joined us in the recovery room to check on Thomas's progress, looked at me with amazement. "You heard Dr. Bennett during the surgery?" "Not just heard," Thomas said. "I felt connected to everyone in that room, like you were all fighting with me, not just for me. I thought about those moments during the surgery when everything had seemed to flow so perfectly, when the tissue had separated as if it wanted to be removed, when Thomas's heart had responded beyond all medical expectation." "Thomas," I said carefully, "what we experienced in that operating room, the way your body responded, the way everything went more smoothly than anyone predicted, that wasn't just medical skill. That was something else." Emma looked up at me with curious eyes. "What was it, Dr. Bennett?" I knelt down so I was at her level. "I think it was love, Emma. The love you and your mommy have for your daddy, and the love he has for both of you. Sometimes that kind of love is stronger than anything medicine can explain." Thomas nodded slowly. "I felt it too. During the hardest moments, I could feel both of you with me, like you were holding my hand through everything." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. "We were," she said simply. "In every prayer, in every hope, in every moment we refused to give up. We were right there with you." Over the next hour, as various medical staff came to check on Thomas's recovery, it became clear that what we were witnessing went beyond typical post-surgical recovery. His vital signs weren't just stable, they were optimal. His healing wasn't just progressing, it was accelerating. "Dr. Bennett," the recovery room nurse, Patricia Coleman, said to me quietly as we stepped outside the room, "in 20 years of post-operative care, I've never seen a patient recover this quickly from such a major procedure. It's like his body is healing itself." Through the window, I could see Thomas sitting up in bed, Emma curled against his side while he read to her from the same children's book Sarah had been reading. Sarah sat in the chair beside them, her hand resting on Thomas's arm, as if she needed to maintain physical contact to believe he was really okay. It was a picture of perfect contentment, of a family that had been given back to each other against all odds. "Dr. Bennett?" Emma's voice called from inside the room. I stepped back inside. "Yes, sweetheart? Will you tell other daddies that they can get better too?" The simplicity of her question hit me like a bolt of lightning. Here was a 3-year-old child, asking me to share hope with other families who might be facing their own impossible situations. Yes, Emma, I promised her. I'll tell them. Thomas looked at me over his daughter's head. Doctor, what happened to us? To our family? It changed something, didn't it? Not just medically, but something deeper. He was right. What we had experienced had changed all of us. It had reminded me why I became a surgeon in the first place, and had shown me that healing involves far more than surgical technique and medical knowledge. As evening approached and visiting hours came to an end, I prepared to leave the Mitchell family to rest together, but Thomas called me back one more time. Dr. Bennett, I have one more request. Anything. Promise me that you'll never forget what happened here. Promise me that when you face other impossible cases, you'll remember that sometimes love and determination can make miracles possible. I looked at this young father who had just survived the impossible, surrounded by the family he had fought so hard to return to, and I made a promise that would change how I practiced medicine forever. That was 6 months ago. Thomas Mitchell returned to work 5 weeks after his surgery, a recovery time that his primary care physician called medically impossible. Emma got her perfect mornings back, running into her parents' bedroom each day to jump on the bed and start the day with laughter. And Sarah got her husband back in every way that mattered. But the story doesn't end there. What happened in that operating room on that March morning changed more than one family. It changed me, and it changed how I approach every patient who walks through the doors of Georgetown University Hospital. 3 weeks after Thomas's surgery, I was called to consult on another complex case. A 55-year-old grandmother named Margaret Foster, facing a diagnosis that her family had been told was hopeless. As I reviewed her scans, I found myself thinking about Thomas Mitchell's words. Sometimes love and determination can make miracles possible. Instead of focusing solely on the medical impossibility of Margaret's case, I spent time with her family. I learned about her grandchildren, about the weekend family dinners she hosted, about the garden she tended every morning before dawn. I learned about the love that surrounded her, and when we operated, I talked to her throughout the procedure, just as I had with Thomas. I told her about her grandchildren waiting for her, about the roses in her garden that needed her care. Margaret Foster made a full recovery. 2 months later, it was Robert Chen, a 43-year-old teacher whose students had made him a wall of get-well cards. Then Maria Santos, a young mother whose twin boys needed their mama to come home. Each case taught me something new about the connection between love, hope, and healing. Each patient showed me that medicine is about more than diagnosis and treatment. It's about honoring the human spirit that refuses to give up. I started doing something I had never done before in 17 years of practice. I began asking every patient to tell me about the people they love, about the moments that make their life worth fighting for. Not just their medical history, their human story. The results have been remarkable. Not every case ends in miraculous recovery. Medicine doesn't work that way. But something has changed in how patients respond to treatment, how families cope with uncertainty, how healing happens in ways that go beyond what we learned in medical school. Last month, Thomas Mitchell came to see me for his 6-month follow-up. His scans were perfect, better than perfect. His heart function was optimal, his energy levels were higher than before his surgery, and his overall health was that of a man 10 years younger. But that wasn't why he had really come. Dr. Bennett, he said as we sat in my office, Emma playing quietly with her toys in the corner while Sarah looked through a magazine. I want to tell you about something that's been happening. What's that? People have been reaching out to us, families facing their own medical challenges. They've heard about our story somehow, and they want to know how we got through it. Sarah looked up from her magazine. 3 families just this week, Dr. Bennett. Parents with sick children, spouses facing impossible diagnoses. They're asking us to share our story. Thomas leaned forward. What happened to us? It's not just our story anymore, is it? It's something bigger. He was right. Word had spread throughout the hospital about the Mitchell miracle, as some of the staff had begun calling it. Families in similar situations were asking to hear about the case where love had seemed to make the impossible possible. What are you thinking? I asked. I want to start something, Thomas said. A support group maybe. Or a way to share stories of hope with families who are where we were 6 months ago. not promising miracles, but sharing the truth. That love and determination matter more than medical statistics. Emma looked up from her toys. "Daddy, are you going to help other families like Dr. Bennett helped us?" Thomas smiled at his daughter. "That's exactly what we're going to do, Princess." Today, the Mitchell Family Hope Foundation operates out of a small office near Georgetown University Hospital. They don't promise medical miracles or impossible cures. Instead, they do something even more powerful. They remind families facing medical crises that they're not alone. That love is stronger than fear, and that sometimes the impossible becomes possible when people refuse to give up on each other. Thomas volunteers there twice a week, sharing his story with other patients facing complex surgeries. Sarah leads a support group for spouses and family members navigating medical uncertainty. And Emma has become the foundation's unofficial mascot, reminding everyone who meets her that perfect mornings are worth fighting for. As for me, I've learned something that 17 years of medical training never taught me. The human heart, not just the organ, but the capacity for love, hope, and connection, is more powerful than any surgical technique I've ever mastered. I still perform complex surgeries. I still study medical journals and attend conferences and work to stay at the cutting edge of surgical advancement. But now I also take time to learn about my patients' lives, their families, their reasons for fighting. Because I've learned that some things belong not only to science, but to life and faith. Every time I walk into an operating room now, I carry with me the memory of Thomas Mitchell's voice saying, "Just bring me back to them." I remember the way Emma's face lit up when she saw her father was going to be okay. I remember the strength in Sarah's eyes as she refused to give up hope. And I remember that behind every patient is a universe of love, fear, and hope waiting. Our job as healers isn't just to treat the disease, it's to honor the human story that makes each life worth saving. The greatest challenge I faced as a surgeon wasn't the technical complexity of Thomas Mitchell's case. It was learning to see beyond the medical problem to the human being who needed healing, and to the family who needed him to come home. That lesson has made me not just a better surgeon, but a better human being. If this story touched you, I want you to know something important. Whether you're facing your own medical challenge, supporting someone you love through a difficult time, or simply trying to hold on to hope in uncertain circumstances, you're not alone. Love is stronger than fear. Hope is more powerful than statistics. And sometimes, when we refuse to give up on each other, the impossible becomes possible. Subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Share your own stories of hope, of families who refused to give up, of moments when love made the impossible happen. Because stories like Thomas and Sarah and Emma's reach farther than you imagine, touching lives and hearts in ways we may never know. You're not alone in this fight, and perfect mornings are always worth fighting for.